We're trying to kind of carve out a niche as an organization that's creating opera that's very contemporary and specific for our culture, and also has a real entertainment bent to it. As an opera company that started singing in dive bars 10 years ago, we've always kind of approached it a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I wanted to take something that's popular in our culture and apply it to the art form that I've grown up in and loved.
VR is very new, specifically cinematic VR is new. So it's a lot about experiences and, being able to sort of check out new experiences that you've never had before. And the fact that this is an opera-based VR experience is very intriguing because, number one, it's musical, but it's theatrical at the same time. And not everybody's been to an opera before. This is a sort of a special case because it's actually scripted and it's a very cool setup, but it also lends itself very well to spatialized audio in general.
What is interesting to me about VR is that the sound has the potential to really surround the viewer. It was exciting for me to be able to make this sort of hybrid opera work that uses electronic elements, that uses the whole space, and that really, this is a way for people to experience opera without actually going to the opera. The power of the human voice to be there in a room with someone who's singing at you. And so the spatialization of the sound that's possible in VR is the best way to experience that. If you're in your VR space and you can actually tell where the sound is coming from, that's really, really exciting.
At first, I was not the world's biggest horror opera fan, or opera fan in general, and then when I actually got in the space when we were shooting it, I could hear the slicing of the knives around me, I could see the watchers around me. I found myself suddenly becoming a convert because the space just reverberated the sound of the really talented opera singers that we have.
A lot of what's being done is demo-y, is more focused on the visuals rather than the character development. And what I really love about this piece is that we've got great protagonists, we've got conflict, we've got mystery, we've got an excuse for an audience to tune back in and see what happens. And that, I think, is a unique thing in this VR world right now.
Our director, Carrie Ann Shim Sham, gives a speech this morning. She says, first rule is have fun. The second rule is if your fun gets in the way of someone else's fun, take your fun somewhere else. And then the third rule is safety. I was like, all right, safety first! We're doing it!
Opera horror VR, oh my God. People would hear the idea and go, oh my God, that's so cool. That's amazing. And that's when I knew that it was something special because of the way other people reacted about it.
Good evening and welcome to the Musicology Horror Show. I am one of your co-hostesses with the mostesses, Joni Brittingham. My other co-hostesses are Whitney George and Kamala Shankaram. Say hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
And tonight we are talking about holiday horror.
Because what is more horrifying than a holiday?
Yes, true. Absolutely.
A holiday during a pandemic?
Yes.
Yes, decidedly. But 'tis the season to stay inside and binge watch. So we'll be walking you through some of the tropes of holiday horror specifically, and some of the things that you will hear in holiday horror music. So let's break it down first. What's one of the biggest themes we see across the genre of holiday horror?
Well, I'm going to take this one because what I think is really interesting about holiday themed horror is that it's the extreme version of this trope that we see in horror in general, which is this idea of the subversion or perversion of innocence, right? So why is it that we see creepy kids and creepy toys in so many movies? Is this idea that there's nothing more horrifying than the sort of the degradation of something that is held to be innocent? And so we can take that trope to its logical extension by looking at holidays, and in particular Christmas, right? Because what is Christmas? It is children unwrapping presents and their cookies and wholesomeness and lights, and it's very, very innocent. So it makes the perfect sort of target for this particular horror trope. So what you start to see in a lot of these movies is taking the elements of Christmas that we find so appealing and so very innocent, and turning them into something dark and twisted.
Excellent, excellent. And so let's anything else to add to that, Whitney?
Yeah. So so there are a couple things that are key to indicating to us that this is not what we might be watching is not just a horror film, but a holiday horror film. And of course, we have like plenty of visuals that indicate to us that it's holiday time. But a lot of the time, those visuals often need kind of they don't necessarily need them, but become more enveloping to us as audience members when they're accompanied by some sort of sympathetic scoring in a way. So like not only are you seeing the holidays, but you're hearing the holidays. And
right. Not unlike shopping, right? If you go into a store at the holidays, it's not enough to see all the potential Christmas gifts laid out. You have to listen to holiday music ad nauseum, played over and over again to get you into the spirit of the holidays. And musical scoring, particularly in film, follows suit.
Yeah,
maybe they started it. I'm not sure which chicken or egg.
It's funny that you mentioned that like the music is necessary to get you into that holiday spirit, because that's definitely something that's shoved down our throats at this point. Like you cannot walk into anyone who's playing like the radio, like a freaking Starbucks or something like that. Like the second we even inch closer towards, Thanksgiving, it's out with the holiday music, and I curse it every single. I don't know what is worse, the first snowfall in New York City or when they finally unveil the Christmas music.
Right, when that first time you hear Mariah Carey singing "All I Want for Christmas with You," and even more horrifying, Jonas Kaufmann singing it with a German accent.
Oh gosh.
Yes. So with this holiday horror theme, we get some musical commonalities that you will hear across all of the holiday horror movies. We get the Christmas carols. They use the Christmas carols, and we'll talk about the most chosen one, the chosen one. Very synthesizer heavy, similar to typical horror scores, especially the 80s and 90s. And if you tuned into our second episode, we talked about that in more detail. And if you missed that one, you can go back and watch it on YouTube later. Over orchestrated. That's one of the things that the three of us discussed. And then finally, a very low budget. So very, very low.
I was thinking, because I obviously spend too much time thinking about things that we'll be talking about. I was thinking about this idea of over-orchestrated films, and the idea that also, so I generally hear over-orchestrated, like distastefully over-orchestrated or questionably under-orchestrated scores from like the B-rated films and below. And I'm wondering, we found, I think, two films that I would say are standouts of the genre, but otherwise we're pretty pummeled with B-rated films. Anyway, so the underscoring, overscoring thing, I think is inherent in the genre because it's relegated mostly to B-rated films.
As is the prevalence of synth music. Like, if you can't afford to hire a composer who necessarily knows what they're doing, or a full orchestra, or even an instrument, one way to cover that up is to use a synthesizer.
Right. I definitely, in preparation for this episode, I watched some movies that I'm pretty sure were composed using a toy Casio keyboard that someone got for Christmas as a child.
But there's something inherently creepy about playing a Christmas carol on a synthesizer. So already it's that same thing, this beloved holiday tradition subverted simply by the fact that it's coming out of this wheezy Casio now, and we recognize that that means that it's been twisted into something it wasn't originally supposed to be.
And here's an idea for those of you who are thinking about writing music for a horror movie. Use an grandma's old spinet piano, because it can't possibly be tuned well enough to ever be fully in tune. So it's going to sound creepy and haunted no matter what you do. So I'd like to see that enter into some of the usage. So let's talk about the way that carols are used. And the number one carol is...
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite. It's my favorite. It's Carol of the Bells, guys.
Carol of the Bells.
I know, as a young, like, kind of young child with goth leanings, this definitely was the one Christmas carol that spoke to my heart. So it makes sense that it's in all of these horror movies.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But why else might it appear in these horror movies?
So, well, okay, weirdly enough, so Carol of the Bells, it's first off, it's about New Year's of all things, which is rad. It's not even about Christmas; it's about New Year's. And I was thinking about, like, why? Okay, so why do we associate it then with Christmas more so than New Year's? It's because people sang it, right? And like caroling is definitely associated with Christmas. Anyway, it is, of course, probably also one of the few tunes that is not only not specific to Christmas, but it also uses the minor mode, which as a young composer, I was pretty sure I swore off minor mode. But yeah, this is Carol of the Bells so that I don't have to sing it.
And it's Ukrainian, which not everybody knows, but you can see.
Yeah, sorry. That's why I chose that clip specifically. I don't. Yes, I don't know if.
Yeah, it's nice to hear it in the original too. I think that gives a sense of what changes occur to it. I mean, my favorite use of Carol of the Bells in any Christmas movie is not a horror movie. It's in the claymation Christmas, where the bells hit themselves with the mallets. But let's talk about which movies we have seen this in. And it's in way more than what we're going to list.
But before we do that, I want to spend just a second talking about the sort of features of hymnody versus carol, right? Because that's another thing that comes up quite a bit in the way that these songs are used, right? Because a lot of the carols that we think of are really, they're hymns, but they're festive hymns, so they're carols. And so what that means is that they have a lot of the harmonic and melodic features that you find in hymnody, which is a lot of open fifths and a lot of very simple stepwise motion and very, very clear and
designed for congregational singing.
Exactly. Simple, designed for congregational singing. And so the Carol of the Bells is actually kind of an outlier in that it doesn't do exactly that.
Right. And I probably one of the things that has made it kind of like withstand the test of time is it kind of has this very inventive quality to it, where we have some like text painting elements. We got like the bing bong, right? So we are listening to bells, but there's also kind of imitative polyphony that's happening, and it feels sparkly because we have so many different elements that they're listening to. So it almost feels like the ear is kind of moving around the piece, and how that translates. I think that plus the upbeat nature of it is. I mean, it kind of plays both sides of the coin. I think a lot like Carol of the Bells, a little bit like I think about the Romantics' fascination between the major and the minor chord. They're like, oh, but like we're so close to something that sounds minor. We're so close to something that sounds major. The idea that we have like that third and we're like, ooh, but we could be evil or we could be good just right then and there. So there's the Carol of the Bells has that kind of harmonically, it's definitely in the minor mode, but like rhythmically, it is upbeat as heck. And texturally, it also has this kind of sparkle element to it. I'm obviously kind of like low-key obsessed with Carol of the Bells as well. I also derailed our conversation wildly yesterday when we were trying to prepare for this, just being like, oh yeah, and by the way, Carol of the Bells is also in this. And
yes, and you derailed it because of this next example. Tell us about this movie, Whitney.
Oh my god, okay, I'm sorry. I'm like, my boyfriend thinks I have like no business being obsessed with this film based on how like little I've truly paid attention to it, but it's because it's a pretty horrible film, and that is Santa Jaws. Now, without, you know what, the trailer kind of really well summarizes the whole film. The trailer. So that's it's the third on the list there, but hopefully you can still hear me while we queue up the trailer. It features, of course, Carol of the Bells. So that's the third listening example here, DJ Igor. I think one more listening example over. Yes, the third one. The trailer. Hooray. So, I don't even mean to advertise for this film, but here we go.
I can't believe you would do this on Christmas Eve.
You're grounded.
What?
Tomorrow is the Christmas Eve comic book party.
Well, you should have thought of that before.
You're better off without him. Isn't that right, Santa Jaws?
Cody! That is not a shark! That is Santa Jaws! I know her! I made her! That is her!
You son of a fish.
Oh, okay. So that is
amazing.
Okay, so first off, I love that the trailer is just like dun 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 dun. Okay, great. And then throughout the entire film, we have like a combination of some brass instruments with some very like kind of Jaws motifs, Also, sorry, let me also paid mind to the idea that the shark is definitely female here. It is a female Santa Jaws. She. So like Carol of the Bells, especially because it's using the minor mode, we're going to see it and hear it a lot of times where it starts as like the jumping off point where we have just that little opening motif, and then we transition into something that's more original scoring for the film. Apparently, the way that you hear Santa Jaws coming is somehow sleigh bells just end up in the source sound that everyone is aware of. But the underscoring is over the top. Even one of these other clips of the film, like trying to kill Santa Jaws, is very fun in how it's overscored, and part of the overscoring also pushes it into the boundary of horror comedy. So I think that kind of overscoring thing, aside from being particular to B-rated films, it seems, also happens to it rely on a lot of Mickey Mousing. A lot of times where the music is closely timed with the image that we're seeing on screen. So I'll torture you with maybe one more minute of attempting to kill Santa Jaws.
All right, we'll take it.
Do you guys hear those bells?
She's coming. Oh, she's coming in hot.
Get into position.
Okay, we can do this, guys. Ready?
Nice shot.
Quick, another before she goes under! Oh, no.
Can I just say, I love how the spear flopped onto the water, and then we see like
there's so many great things here. Okay, the moment where like the ornament is dropped is arguably like one of the more overscored things I've ever experienced. Which is, it's hysterical. The whole, if I haven't whetted your appetite enough with the trailer and the first clip, I really recommend, it's on Amazon Prime right now. I really recommend like skipping a lot of the exposition and unnecessary dialogue and just skip straight to the shark scenes. I also happen to really like shark films for whatever reason. I'm so sorry, everyone. But so obviously there was a lot of intersecting circles of interest for me, plus Carol of the Bells, which there are only selected clips of Santa Jaws on the internet because, I mean, who knows why? Probably because of its popularity. But there's more Carol of the Bells in there, if you were wondering. There's a good reason why it shows up like El Numero Uno in the trailer right there. It's like right there, right up front. It happens right in the opening scene. Carol of the Bells comes back a number of times. It's so great. Anyway, I'm into it.
I'm muted. Carol of the Bells isn't just used in horror, right? It's also used in Christmas comedies, but to create an aura or an atmosphere of something scary. So what's our next example, and how are they using it to to bridge that gap between horror and comedy?
So I guess we have two examples here. We have both Home Alone, which is super classic for the holidays. Technically, like some of the elements of the plot are very horror related, especially like, I guess what, as a parent, like leaving your child at home is very horrific. But there's some kind of menacing figures that are in Home Alone, and not to say that it is a horror, but definitely has a comedic approach to it. One of my favorite segments of the film is, again, Carol of the Bells makes an entrance. Macaulay Culkin, right, our lead in his cute little youth, is going to booby
I was totally going to marry him when
I know everyone was going to marry Macaulay Culkin, and then everyone was going to marry who was the I guess we have like a long streak of blondes that everyone was crushing on for a while, like Leonardo DiCaprio. I guess some people were really into Hanson for a while, right? Mbop. No.
I think Kamala is making the face of
She's like, no.
This is a horror movie.
Right.
So let's take a look at that clip. Let's take a look at the Home Alone setting the traps.
Yeah.
What about you?
Me?
Yeah, you and your son.
We'll see what happens. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
My house. I have to defend it.
I mean, honestly, the scariest character in Home Alone is Kevin.
Is Kevin.
He's a sociopath, and he's going to kill somebody by the time he's college age. Like, I worry for him.
That's true. Like, guys, when the drum set comes in, I'm like, it's and I know I talked about it yesterday as well, and probably to everyone this last week, but like Metallica, it kind of like rubs shoulders with the Metallica cover of Carol,
which we won't play because they are notoriously litigious.
Yeah, it's true. But like, please, if you haven't, if you're like, wow, Metallica like played, please just go ahead and do yourself a huge favor. They usually do it alongside like a full orchestra. It's absolutely ridiculous and very hammy towards the beginning, and then they drop it and okay, anyway, I obviously have dreams of doing this on stage, but
you could join Manhattan Transfer.
I know. What I love about this is like it starts off with Carol of the Bells and then works off its way into like different kind of inventions, right? Where it's using it as a jumping off point and really maintains a kind of busy texture here. And part of it is to continue on the energy here. Macaulay Culkin is about like high energy here. He's really on edge with a little bit of anxiety. If we cut the sound from the image that we see, it's not nearly so, it doesn't push anything really forward. So
and that busy texture, that's not just limited to Christmas family films, right? That's something that we see a lot in Christmas horror, and especially Christmas horror that leans more towards the camp and comedy side. Like if you've watched the movie Krampus, which is not that great, the sound design is like, it doesn't know whether it wants to be a comedy or a horror film at various points. And sometimes it is both. And a family drama for some reason, which skip that one, it's fine. But other movies like Silent Night, Deadly Night, right? This movie was pulled from theaters a week after it landed because of moral outrage, because it was just so gory. At one point, a woman wielding an axe is running away from the killer, holding the axe like she's going to defend herself, and he shoots her with a bow and arrow. Like you do. Kamala, I think you had some thoughts on this one.
So the score is really interesting because it's this is an established composer who does it. Oh, what's his name? Peter Boykin, I think, who's done like several other soundtracks. And what you hear is sort of variations on the different things that we've been talking about so far, but then bringing in also this idea of what kind of timbres are used to indicate that now we're in holiday horror land, right? So we know that we can have the actual notes of Carol of the Bells, but the other thing that you heard in these examples is the actual use of bells. So bells, children's voices, other things that connote this sort of holiday innocence thing that can then be darkened and turned to indicate something terrifying. And then of course, the familiar synth textures, because a lot of these movies come from the 80s. So DJ Argor, shall we listen to a little bit of the main title from Silent Night, Deadly Night? Huzzah!
Watching Santa's waiting, Christmas Eve is slowly fading. Can you hear him in the night? Close the door, turn out the light.
I think we've heard enough to get the idea. So
we don't heard enough of that. We've never heard enough of that. Wow.
So that was magnificent.
Yes. So we have the child, right, who not only is the sweet, innocent child talking about the lights turning out and someone coming to get you, but the child has the lisp and everything. And then we have synth bell textures that come in, right? So there's still these sort of analog synth sounds, but they're emulating, they're not low sounds, right? Which that's mostly what we hear in horror movies, especially with synthesizer textures, is things that are very low, because low means danger, like thunder or earthquakes or whatever. So it's a rarity to hear high sounds, but the high sounds here are holiday, snow, bells, and they're evil bells, and they're gonna kill you.
They are evil bells.
I also love the idea that a lot of horror in terms of underscoring is also put in an environment that's quite cavernous and large. Like definitely the opening of that was unnecessarily were we in the world's largest bathroom? I'm not quite sure.
We're in the world's largest chimney.
Right, exactly. And
the reverb.
There's probably something that's sort of like the farness away of sound versus the closeness of it makes us feel a little bit less comfortable, that there's some kind of physical distance that we enjoy as listeners, and when we're pulled out of that area, it's anyway, we hear that a lot of times in just horror in general, the idea that things are like further away, disembodied, creepy,
and that loud sounds and very quiet sounds or silence are juxtaposed. We see that in the Spanish film El Día de la Bestia, The Day of the Beast, where what is added to it is death metal, because that is, of course, the devil's music. Mm-hmm. So I think that one's a really interesting use of it. And if we look at something like Black Christmas, which we're going to play the clip that this is the clip that this movie made. This is the very first time that this happened in a movie. So, DJ Igor, if you could play the call coming, where is the call coming from?
Listen to me. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. Our squad cars are going over there right now. Just get out of that house.
And that's all you need to see. The call is coming from inside the house because they have a landline. More than one landline.
It's the 70s. They're a rich sorority.
I'm changing my ringtone to that, I think. I think that's an appropriate ringtone. Jagada,
Yes.
jagada.
Jagada. But only if it also is accompanied by a like jarring close up. If you could make your webcam do that on a Zoom call. That Zoom call is coming from inside the house.
I think everything is coming from inside the house.
You know, we live in a time where everything is coming from inside the house. Yeah, and Black Christmas is another one that uses the like creepy far away Christmas carol and then is juxtaposed with this orchestral sound and that the violins, which we'll talk about a little bit more later too. All right. So the next movie I have on the list is Jack Frost, which I misunderstood the assignment and I watched the 1979 claymation one. I personally found this version to be utterly terrifying. Buddy Hackett sings throughout, and it is a claymation that Danny Elfman is not involved in at all.
Rude.
And the music sounds like the score of Pippin, and it's very like anti-Soviet propaganda. So that's my review.
Which I watched the comedy Jack Frost, which is about a serial killer who reincarnates as a snowman, not to be confused with the movie where is it Mel Gibson who reincarnates as a snowman? That's also horrifying.
Anything where anyone reincarnates as a snowman or there's a whistling spirit that brings winter, terrifying.
Yes, terrifying. But this movie is truly, truly awful. And the soundtrack really incorporates some of these things that we've been talking about, like synthesizers, because they can't afford a real sound score. But then also the heavy use of Christmas music or things that sound like Christmas music and subverted Christmas music to create the scenario of horror. So we're just going to watch a little clip of this. DJ Igor, this should start around 1 minute and 50.
Killer Snowman, is it yours?
Yes. No!
Oh, yes. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't give a rat's ass about Tyler's little snowman. Huh.
And that is probably enough.
I didn't do it. Holy moly, right?
So you heard in the background a lot of like ba-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, like this sort of riff on the Nutcracker almost, and things that are sort of similar enough to familiar Christmas music that it makes us think Christmas without actually having to pay for the copyright for the tunes that they're ripping off. But then, of course, this is accompanied by a child being decapitated by a sled. So here we go again with this idea that the sort of point of the holiday horror is how horrific it is to pair extreme terror and violence with the idea of Christmas music.
Excellent.
There's one other Jack Frost film that exists out there, which I'm just going to give a little bit of airtime. I got distracted mostly because it stars Michael Keaton.
Oh, it's Michael Keaton. That's who it is.
Michael Keaton. So like obviously I was like, but Michael Keaton was Batman, and then I got really derailed on Batman, and then I also found Santa Shark or Santa Jaws. So it's been a tumultuous December for yours truly, but just in case you weren't like fulfilled with as like the the idea of Jack Frost coming back as a character in a film. Michael Keaton stars in this. It's from 1998, and it's listed as a dark fantasy drama. Michael Keaton dies and then comes back to life as Jack Frost, a snowman. So if you, for some reason, need to see Michael Keaton in a role beyond Batman, I mean,
yeah, and I encourage our audience to watch all 3 Jack Frost movies on your quarantined Christmas.
Consider it like a Jack Frost tasting, a flight of Jack Frost, if you will.
It's a trio of Jack Frosts.
Yes,
delightful.
A very bitter aftertaste here. So let's move on to something delicious, and that is Danny Elfman. And The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yes.
True.
So we're going to start with Nightmare Before Christmas, but really it's sort of like all of Danny Elfman's music we discovered kind of sounds like Christmas horror. Because of the use of these bells and some of the melodic and harmonic motion that you find in carols and hymns in general, like the use of the fifth and the stepwise motion and all of that. And tinkly bells. But what we're going to listen to from Nightmare Before Christmas is Making Christmas, because this sounds quite a bit like Carol of the Bells if you listen closely. So we'll just hear a bit of it.
This time, making Christmas. Making Christmas. Making Christmas is so fine.
It's ours this time, and won't the children be surprised?
It's ours this time.
Making Christmas. Making Christmas. Making Christmas. Time to give them.
This is probably enough, although I could make you all watch the whole thing.
I mean, I could watch the whole thing just over and over. And I will say, this movie utterly terrified me as a child. Completely terrified me because of the Oogie Boogie.
Yeah, the Oogie Boogie Man's kind of terrifying. It's true.
Yeah.
He's got worms inside of him.
It became less scary once I found out it was voiced by the same voice actor as Sebastian the Crab.
Good choice. I love that Danny Elfman's scoring has that same kind of feeling of invention. The idea that we have like the first phrase of the melody that's then stated in diminution, right? It's done in halftime as a way of answering itself, it's got like clever little components and pieces, and everyone's assembling little components and pieces in the Making Christmas thing. It really reinforces in a clever, not quite so obvious in your face sort of way.
And while it has all of these traditional timbral things that we find in this other music, it's not done cheaply, and you can hear the difference. And it's done with some obvious skill that you don't necessarily hear in the lower budget films. So
I think it's interesting how it so we talked about how Carol of the Bells is often used as a gateway to chromaticism. And you can hear that in this, like if you listen to the whole thing, that instead of just continuing with the movement through the fifth and then the stepwise down like Carol of the Bells, he actually uses more of this chromatic movement. So taking the Carol of the Bells trope and taking it into a more complex direction than it might actually exist in the carol itself.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's interesting about quotations in general, where our source is a little bit on the more, I mean, not to say, I think Carol of the Bells is like a original source does have like a good strong sense of original invention, which really makes the spin-offs of it a little bit more elevated even. So it makes me really excited when I hear it as a musical cue or the starting of one. I was also thinking, I was like, oh man, I wonder if I wonder if the quotations for the Dies Irae and the quotations for Carol of the Bells like went out like if we did a tally, I think they'd be.
And music history students, if you're listening, there's your paper topic for your spring music history class.
I know, I'm about to defend my dissertation, but I think I should just throw it out for a Carol of the Bells dissertation.
You absolutely should.
Yes.
Start from scratch.
Why have one dissertation when I could have two dissertations? Why have one complete dissertation when I could have two?
How could you not want to talk about Santa Jaws in your dissertation defense?
Right.
And with that, I think we should move on a bit more. So let's move on to the violin themes. And why is the violin always the devil? In preparation for this, we talked about how the viola is never the devil, right?
Although it really is.
Although it really is.
It would never make a comeback if the viola was the representation of the devil. It would never. It gets so much flack in the string quartet in general. So, if you can envision a string instrument, what's probably first, the most noticeable thing about them, at least for me, is that they resemble the shape of a human body. All of them. They look like they're all part of one cute family, right? The violin, made this joke yesterday about the violin being portable and therefore the devil's got places to go. We can only choose the most portable of all instruments. But in all fairness,
why didn't he pick the Irish tin whistle?
You know, a good point. I know, true. Why not choose a piccolo, which is a truly hated instrument that anyway, all right. So I think
the devil picks stringed instruments. He picks the guitar, he picks the violin.
Yeah. I think portability and the fact that the violin's been practicality, and the idea that the violin's been around for freaking forever too, and violin replicated-esque instruments in terms of their design and stuff. So what I love about horror films and of course horror comedy and is that when we confront an evil force, oftentimes they're accompanied by this kind of wacky detuned violin sound. I'd love for us to listen to probably my favorite example of this kind of deformed sort of actually, Kamala, do you and I we all talked about this a little bit. What are your thoughts about the violin representing the devil, or why is the violin so connected to the devil?
I kind of feel like it's because, from a timbral perspective, it sounds like a voice. If you're going to pick an instrument that's closest to the human voice, it's going to be a string. And also, I think because if there is this also popular approach to playing the violin, like you find fiddles, especially fiddles associated with the devil, and this is not going back as far as we're talking about, but the idea that the devil is a fiddler, or the devil is Roma or whatever, who plays the violin.
The devil's out to get your soul via some really good fiddle playing, which I think is admirable. I like being wooed to the dark side with the arts and stuff. So I think we hear a lot of
it is a parents watching. It is a gateway.
It's a gateway instrument. So please don't let your children start playing violin. It's really one step next to the occult, as far as we're all concerned, and we're concerned. But mostly when we hear it in correspondence to not necessarily horror, but an adversary or someone who is, more often supernatural in their qualities. We have what we call a scordatura is generally applied to the instrument, where we're falsely tuning it, usually to apply the tritone to it, the devil's interval.
Hey, hearkening back to episode 1 of Musicology Horror Show, which if you have not watched, you can go to YouTube and you can see all of our previous episodes on the Opera on Tap channel.
Yep. If we could play the first minute of the Beetlejuice violin cue to even just hear what I'm kind of talking about with this detuned scordatura violin.
Where are you? Help them, please.
Sure, I can help them. You gotta help me.
What?
Look, I'm what you might call an illegal alien, okay? I want out for good. In order for me to do that, hey, I gotta get married. Hey, these aren't my rules. Come to think of it, I don't have any rules. Come on. Look, you think of it as a marriage of inconvenience, okay? We both get something. I get out. You get to say you're hitched to the most eligible bachelor since Valentino came over. We're even, babe.
Okay, just help them.
I mean, it sounds like the main motive that's being played on the violin is lifted straight from the Soldier's Tale's tango section of the trio of dances.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's all about a soldier and a run-in with the devil who is out for his violin because it embodies his soul. Just a quick spark notes on that one. So, gosh, classic film.
Absolutely. And I think our next strong violin cue comes from perhaps my favorite of the horror comedy Christmas genre, Gremlins. A movie that brings just joy and disgust. I do love Gizmo in that little car. And I will say, if we go back to our original thesis statement, this is a good conclusion for us. Our original thesis statement is that one of the focuses of Christmas and holiday horror films is the idea of the loss of innocence, which was an intentional thing from the creators of this movie. That the idea that American culture, consumerist culture, cannot touch anything and it retains its innocence. And one of my favorite parts of that movie, and we're not going to play the example of it, is, they look into the movie theater and it's like, what are they doing? They're singing, and they're singing along to Snow White. And it's all these gremlins who've been so horrible and destructive, and they're smoking and setting things on fire and attacking people and doing all these horrible things. And then they're singing along to Snow White. And watching it made me think of the scene in Full Metal Jacket when the soldiers, are carrying their guns, heading into war, and they're singing Mickey Mouse Club. So
I think this Gremlins, again, is kind of a classic for a number of reasons. Playing those clips of Beetlejuice and the opening of Gremlins, like right back to back, was cool. It's pretty similar. Earlier in the film, whenever you see a Gremlin solo, it's usually accompanied by that kind of distorted violin sound. When they're also making the transition in terms of scoring the gremlin before it becomes the gremlin, right? We have this kind of this intermediary kind of area. We have a lot of synthesized sounds in the particular area of the film, which I think is kind of fun.
It's also 1984.
Yeah, totally. I think we really needed a spot to put in some good synth sounds. Absolutely. The opening of the film, which happens in the weird, creepy shop, is also wonderfully overscored. It's like, oh, you want some creepy shop music? Here's some creepy shop music. So I think one of the things that makes this film a comedy in particular is actually how the music is paired with the image. It kind of makes it feel, although it's not a cartoon, that it is kind of cartoon-like in its approach. And then when we're thinking about the fact that you're combining like a little animatronic sort of figure with the live action, that kind of actually seems appropriate. That like there's something that the sound world actually does to put those two things that are actually quite different in the same sort of space. So I don't know. Fun film for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Any closing thoughts from you, Kamala?
Oh, I mean, I guess, like, I kind of think all Christmas music is horror Christmas music. So, but that comes from many years working in the Catholic Church.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
And now that's going to live online forever.
That's going to live online forever.
Forever.
So thank you all for joining us tonight. We are back tomorrow night, not we, all of us, but Opera on Tap is streaming tomorrow night with What the Frost, some reimaginings of Christmas songs in operatic fashion. So there will be some real comedy and some delightful singing as well. And I believe that there are some other wonderful operatic things happening with many of our friends. Kamala, if you'd like to share about Here Arts and Experiments in Opera.
Yes. So first up, Experiments in Opera has just released an opera podcast called Aquanet and Funyuns, which Miss Joni Brittingham actually is a featured singer in. And you can hear it on anything that you listen to podcasts on, so Apple or Spotify or whatever it is. And then with Here Art Center for the last 6 weeks, I have been doing a psychedelic space opera performed live online once a week. Next week, the 17th, is the finale. So before the finale, Here is going to stream all 6 prior episodes, followed by the 7th performed live, and that all starts at 7 o'clock.
Yes, thank you. And I will say I've watched it, and another Opera on Tap regular, Joy Jan Jones, is in it, and she is phenomenal, and she is singing in her home, and the accompaniment is somebody else's computer in their home. It's really quite a brilliant piece and really incredibly executed, and wonderfully composed too.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you all for joining us this evening as we talked about the holiday horror. Again, I'm Joni Brittingham, and I'm here with Whitney George and Kamala Shankram. And this is Through Opera on Tap. This is the last episode of Musicology Horror Show for the year. We will be bringing you season 2 sometime in the spring, so you can look forward to that streaming on Emmy and Harry's Through Opera on Tap. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.